because he will take questions at the end of his presentation. The most important part about his discussion was the fact that he would want to see Africa unite. He's talked about Africa having a single and a unified army. He talked about the UPDF securing Uganda, securing Somalia, securing Burundi, Central African Republic, and I think someone must put it to him. He also said that why isn't it that President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni cannot ask the UPDF to totally unify the Great Lakes region and it becomes one state of Uganda. Those are the words of Professor Alanyo. You can ask him those questions. He also talked about the issue of reparations. How can Africa get the reparations that they require? That is from the issue of history. He also talked about that. And he also talked about African leaders and sticking together, and also the issue of old borders and why is it that we are still defined by our old borders. So thank you very much, Professor Alonyo. We shall come back to you. At this juncture, I'd like to call upon Mr. Gerishom Okonda from Kenya. He's also going to further elaborate on African unity and where we go from here and the role that the Pan-African Pyramid can play. Can you have a round of applause, please, as he comes in?
So much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, esteemed leaders who are present here, brothers and sisters of Africa, people from diaspora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. All protocol observed. I was given a subject to share with you from research, from experience as an educationist on how we can be able to decolonize the mind of Africans. So my conversation will be revolving around matter education. I had prepared my conversation in a manner that I will read it. One, just to make sure I'm disciplined with matter time, but I know we shall have more time to discuss during the question and answer time. I will start by saying that it's both a privilege and a sacred responsibility to stand before you this evening here in the heart of Kampala, Uganda, at the 8th Pan-African Pyramid Global Award and the 11th anniversary dinner. We gather not merely to celebrate achievements, but to reignite a fire, maybe for the generation that was born during the time of matchsticks and gaslighters, that an African man was well equipped with a special stick, igniting on a special stone where fire was lit. For me, that is a software that is lying dormant that we have to reawaken today. Who say that we never used to have our own source of igniting fire? And so be prepared that this evening we are going to put our mind together and see how can we be able to decolonize our mind and think a bit different for us to get different results. They say if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting different results, the only closest mindset of a person can be compared to is a mad person. And so for us to get different results, we need to do things differently. And so, as an African proverb says, until the lion have their own history or their own historians. The history of the hunt as an activity will always glorify the hunter. So today let us be historians, the philosophers, the knowledge bearers, and above all, the liberators of our own mind. So why decolonize the African mind? I'll be slow in my conversation so that if you have a question to ask, you can put it down and see exactly how this conversation can bring a change. Colonization was not only about land. Many times when you talk about colonization, we're talking about, our land was taken away, our heritage, our culture was demeaned. But let me tell you, the real colonization was the colonization of the mind. Sometimes it's not about the hardware, it's about the software. The greatest conqueror of Africa was not seizing of territories. It was not the captivity of the thought. It was the captivity of our mindset. When Europe invaded Africa, it did not only carry guns, neither did it just carry Bibles, neither did it just carry the textbooks. It carried schools, it carried churches, it carried more dangerously the language. The one, if I teach you my language and I make you look at your language as the third material, then already your identity has been lost. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, one of the greatest Kenyan sons, once said that the biggest weapon wielded and actually daily unleashed by imperialism is the cultural bomb. The effect of cultural bomb is to annihilate a people's belief in their names, in their language, in their heritage, in their unity, in their capacity, and ultimately in themselves. That is exactly what we must undo. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to start unlearning what we learned yesterday and start relearning freshly. Of course, when we are more informed about how the knowledge of yesterday of the colonizer affected the way we live today and affected what we believe in today. I will make a quote from Kwame Nkrumah, who reminded us that we face neither east or west, but we face forward. So facing forward means standing in the firm foundation of African wisdom, while also engaging the modern world with dignity. Brothers and sisters, when a child learns that God speaks only English, only French and Portuguese, but not language like Luganda, or Kiswahili, or Zulu, or Yoruba, or Luo, then we are already getting cheated. When we need to start questioning why all angels had English or European names. Was it just the spread of religion, or was it mind conditioning? When we teach philosophy only from the Greek, but forget the Egypt and the Timbuktu housed libraries and university long before even the Athens, then colonization will continue. The mind must be freed from Africa to be free. Until we free our mind, Africa is not yet free. And freeing of our mind will start today, this evening. All of us must be ready for the game. the chain of the mind are heavier than the chain of the body. All we learn in history is about how our ancestors were chained. But we rarely talk about how our mind was chained. If I may borrow shortly from a story of a young man who was called Kunta Kinte, who was forced to take a new name. His name was Kunta Kinte, but the colonizers gave him a new name and told him, say your name is Toby. And he refused. He kept saying, my name is Kunta Kinte. And he was whipped on chains. He was chained. But he kept refusing until that time when the pain was more unbearable. He gave in just to make sure that now I'm no longer going to be whipped. But if all of us were to have that mindset, that attitude, that resilience of Kunta Kinte, who knew so well by changing my name, you are changing my identity, then today we are going to start having a new conversation. We need to be thinking about reclaiming African epistemologies. Epistemologies is the way we know. It's about knowledge, the way we understand the world. It has always been at the core of African society. Before the colonizers came, Africans had their way of knowing things. It was rooted in the culture, in the community, spirituality, and observation. For purpose of clarity, epistemology is a branch of philosophy that is concerned with knowledge. And it asks specific questions. For example, what is knowledge? How do we know what we know? What counts as truth and justified beliefs? What are the source of the knowledge that we are learning? Is it the perception that were given to us when we were in class? Reasons, memory, traditions, and testimonies. What are the limits of this knowledge? Ladies and gentlemen, schools did not come with the colonizers. We had our own education system as Africans, remember? We could sit down under a tree and an elder would come to counsel us. Our girls would be mentored by their aunties. And young men went through an initiation which turned you from boys to men. How you are supposed to take care of your family. How you are supposed to be protecting your family. We went through education. We had faculties of medicine, ladies and gentlemen. We had our own medicine which we were using to heal ourselves. We had faculties of agriculture where we were taught how to prepare seedlings, how to prepare land. Today, the governments are being colluded and compromised to go into the world of GMOs. A seed that you plant today, and even as you harvest and take a meal out of it, you cannot replant that seed. This is the time we are now missing how our grandmothers and our grandfathers used to prepare the seed and put it somewhere at the top of the kitchen preparing point where the smoke will keep the seed alive until that day when the planting season comes. And that seed will always be replanted and replanted and replanted even after every harvest.
Mr. Gershom, 1 minute and counting, please.
Thank you. To move on, how are we going to reclaim our African language? Remember, language is the carrier of our culture, the vehicle of thought, the mirror of people's souls. To lose one's language is to lose one's identity. Why must African child learn to say good morning before he learned to say bushere, before he learns to say habari yako, hujambo. Why have we accepted that learning and speaking fluent English is a measure of our intellectual quotient? Isn't that colonization enough to make us think about how we can reverse this? And if learning good English is the measure of intellectuality, the creation of industrialists, then it's important we remind ourselves the economies like in China, they don't learn English. They learn Chinese. The industries in the economies of a place like Japan, they don't learn English. They learn Japanese. But they are strong economies. It is time to start unlearning what we learned yesterday and start relearning afresh. As I conclude, how are we going to reclaim our African philosophies? Every society lives by its philosophy, its understanding of existence, morality, community, and destiny. Colonialism taught us that Africa has no philosophy, but Africa had and still have deep philosophy of life. Ubuntu from South Africa reminds us, I am because we are. It is an ethic of community and independence of shared humanity. In my conclusion, it's important that we understand the path of rebuilding or decolonizing Africa will be number one on educational reforms. We have to sit down and change our curriculum for the sake of the future generation. Number two, we have to come up with a language policy. African government must elevate indigenous language in school. Parliaments, courts, and media. Kiswahili already is an official AU language which unifies the entire Africa. We can do things better. I miss and I remember in 70s when I was starting my school, I used to be taught mother tongue in my first 3 years in school. I don't know where that disappeared to, because later on we came to find out that it was a competition of who knows to speak English better than the other. English is not a measure of intellectuality. 3, knowledge systems. Let us fund African research, document indigenous wisdom. Let us support herbal medicine, traditional conflict resolution. The storytelling, it must remain as valid as it was during the times of our forefathers. Number 4, the philosophy. The philosophical renaissance. Our leaders, scholars, and artists must articulate policies and create work rooted in African values like Ubuntu, like Harambe, like Sankova.
And finally,
the Pan-African unity. Because no single African nation can achieve this alone, we must unite and work together as a team. As I stop there, I want to thank everybody. Let God bless Africa as we soldier on together for one Africa, one passport, one currency, one destination. Africa is one drum. We only have several beats, and that's what makes the music. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gashema Kanda. Like he stressed the point, English is no determinant of one's intellectual capacity, of one's IQ. But language is very important. Kwa sababu nitaongea kwa lugha ya Swahili. Asante sana, Mr. Gershom Nkonda. Najua nini una think mimi sijui Kiswahili. Mimi najua. Okay, without further ado, can I kindly call Professor Humphrey Ojwang? But before I call Professor Humphrey Ojwang, I know Honorable Kasambide has kindly joined us. Is supposed to be next. So without further ado, Senior Counsel Kasambide, can you kindly take the floor and have your discussion? We are limiting it to 10 minutes. You know, we're talking about Pan-Africanism, we're talking about unifying Africa, we're talking about being great. The one most important thing that we can't do without is time management. Okay, so as Mr. Mukasa Mbide prepares, can we kindly have Professor Juan, please, go to the podium.
Thank you. I will start with the Right Honorable First Deputy Prime Minister of Uganda and the Minister for East African Community Affairs, Dr. Rebecca A. Kadaga, MP, who's seated next to me there. We have just exchanged contacts because we need to think East African, we need to think African. So it's a wonderful occasion to have you. Organizers of this solemn assembly, especially my dear brother, Andrew. I met him 3 years ago, a dynamic man, and we have remained friends ever since, exchanging ideas. And Professor George William Alenyo, I want to assure you that I'm not running for the presidency of the Luo Union in Eastern and Central Africa. I'm just an ordinary member of that community. Thank you for thinking about me, a great Pan-Africanist. And all the diplomatic representatives from various countries, I don't need to single out those countries and entities. May I also acknowledge your presence. I didn't know that I was coming to a very international gathering. I was supposed to be here last year, but due to unforeseen circumstances, it has taken me one whole year to come. And God's time is the best time. Now, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being in this assembly and, reflecting upon some of these weighty issues. I want to introduce myself. I am a teacher by profession, over 40 years experience in my country, Kenya. High school, well, I taught English, or I still teach English, because it's the medium of instruction. In schools, Kenya, I believe in Uganda too. Tanzania has a different language policy. That's what I discovered. I was even a British Council scholar. But for my doctorate, I reverted my attention to African studies. So like Ruyo Thiongo, he had a master's degree in English, but he stopped writing in English. He reverted to writing in his indigenous Gikuyu language, and then would later translate his works into English and Russian and Chinese. So charity begins at home. And then I want to remodify my topic. I like teaching, although I'm supposed to lecture or just give a presentation, but I'll be pedagogical in approach. I have modified my topic to read African indigenous knowledge systems and development. Then subtitle, Ethno-conservation approaches to sustainable and healthy living. Why ethno-conservation approaches to sustainable and healthy living? Because conservation has to do with life. Conservation of resources, conservation of life, conservation of culture, conservation of everything. So we must think of a people-centered conservation approach or approaches. I want to pay tribute to a great Ugandan, and some of you might have not heard about him. A great Ugandan anthropologist. And I want to test you, because I told you I'm not lecturing, I'm teaching. Once upon a time, there was a great Ugandan who went to play football in the United Kingdom. And that was, yes, in the United Kingdom. And then he stayed behind when the rest of the Ugandan football team was coming back. He stayed behind. I think he disappeared, into the crowd, and then looked for opportunities in the United Kingdom. It was during the colonial period, British colonial period. So he ended up in Bristol and took an advanced diploma in education. And as if that was not enough, he went to Aberystwyth, University of Wales at Aberystwyth, and took an LLB degree. But while he was taking his LLB degree, he heard something about trial by ordeal. Trial by ordeal. He wanted to pursue it. What is trial by ordeal? And his lecturer told him, we don't do social anthropology here. After your LLB, please go to Oxford and register with the Institute of Anthropology under Evans Pritchard. And he did that. But when he was in Oxford, the first lecture, African culture was being referred to as primitive, backward, ignorant, and he stood up and protested violently and said, African culture is not Africa, it's not a dark continent, and our culture is as good as any other culture. So I want to test you, the Ugandans all the Ugandans in the house, hands up. Or if you are a Ugandan, well, I was a Ugandan 600 years ago. Then I migrated to Kenya. And okay, anybody wants to try? Yes. Okot Bitek. Thank you, Joseph, my brother Joseph Ocheno from Eastern Uganda, Tororo, I think. Yes. Okot Bitek. So in 1980, he was born in 1931 and he died in 1982 at the age of 51. But what he did is being retrieved now, and I'm one of the people in the vanguard of rehabilitating Okot Bitek. In 1982, after his death at Makerere University in his house, I was moved because he had shaped my thinking. I'd attended his lectures in Kisumu, in Kenya. So I wrote a tribute to Okot Bitek. Okot Bitek on trial. I wrote this play and the substance. I wrote this play as a tribute to Okot Bitek in 1982-83, and it was published in 1993, and it has been revisited in Kenya 3 times. Kisumu twice, sponsored by Professor Peter Nyang' Nyogo, and Arusha during Festac. People like PLO Lumumba organized Festac in Arusha, so it was also stayed there. Of course, last year we had Festac in Kisumu, and this month, September, they are going to Ghana. You know what Festac is all about. It's all about black artists and all that. So, Okot Bitek. Why am I starting with that narratology? African narrative epistemology. And somebody talked about, my friend from Kenya, epistemology. For me, I talk of African narrative epistemology. You must tell your own story from your own perspective. If you don't tell your story, someone will tell your story on your behalf, and the story might not represent you. So we must start with telling our stories. So, as I said earlier, African indigenous knowledge systems. That's my main topic. And I will focus on a very small area, ethnobotany. Ethnobotany. Notice that I'm not talking about botany. I'm talking about ethnobotany. And by extension, you can talk of ethnozoology. And you can, by extension, talk about ethno-veterinary medicine or veterinary sciences. And when I'm talking of veterinary or livestock development, the person who comes to my mind is the President of the Republic of Uganda. And his attachment to those indigenous longhorned cows. I would like to interview about that, why he's attached to those cows. And one time, 2 Kenyan leaders came to Uganda, and instead of treating them, in a house, he took them out to go and look after cattle. Raila Odinga and William Samoei Ruto. Now, by giving you that example, I'm talking about our indigenous knowledge system. The Ankole cattle, the Borana cattle, the kienyeji kuku, the kienyeji seeds. And my brother from Kenya has just talked about that. The GMOs and the indigenous seeds. I did research in Homabay County, which is on the shores of Lake Victoria. I met a woman who was a plant breeder. And people would come to her every planting season and get the original seed. But do you know something? And the lawyers who are in this house dealing with IP and all that, do you know something? That, I don't know about Uganda, but in Kenya, they are outlawing, because of the big seed, companies, they are outlawing sharing of seeds among farmers, among neighbors, among family. If you're found sharing or selling, it is an offense, and you can be jailed for 5 years. Can you imagine? Your food is being criminalized. So I am focusing on ethnobotany. By ethnobotany, this is anthropological. By ethnobotany, I mean people-centered botanical knowledge. And I gave a talk at the National Museums of Kenya 3 years ago, and I gave the same, a version of the same to Nature Tanzania.